Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu's martial art remains one of the most integral parts of any MMA fighter's game plan. Sure, knockouts are great, but the feeling of making someone consciously surrender has an entirely different appeal. In this video, we will rank some of the best submission victories in MMA history, so stay tuned to find out. Starting off with number 9, Royce Gracie vs. Dan Severn at UFC 4. MMA wouldn't exist if not for the Gracie family. The Gracie family is responsible for popularizing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu through events like the Gracie Challenge and their work in establishing the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Royce Gracie continued the family legacy of supremacy at the first Ultimate Fighting Championship by sweeping the night's competition. Gracie would fight Dan the Beast Severn, a former Olympic wrestler, in the finals of the 4th UFC competition. He wrestled the small Gracie to the ground and held him for 15 seconds, using his weight and ability to his advantage. Severn believed he had Gracie just where he wanted him without making much of an effort. But nope, this is where the tables turned. Gracie executed the first ever triangle choke in mixed martial arts as he wrapped his legs over the top of the much smaller Severn, an example of a submission that proved that a fighter's threat is ever present, even after being on the bottom. Up next at number 8, Rio Conan and Anderson Silva at Pride Shockwave 2004. Who is Rio? We understand if you do not know who Rio Conan is, but he was one of the most decorated fighters in early MMA. No one had finished Anderson Silva before him for more than 8 years. And if you don't count Yushin Okami's DQ victory over Silva, he was also the last guy to defeat Silva over that period. Chonan's performance in defeating the Spider was nothing short of spectacular. Chonan chose not to leave it up to the judges and instead submitted Silva after a back-and-forth contest in which both combatants had their chances in the striking and grappling exchanges. Unfortunately for that to happen, he would have to take Silva to the ground first. Chonan avoided going for the double leg by instead executing a flying scissor sweep. This would later be transitioned into an inverted heel hook that sent Silva shrieking in pain. The submission is still discussed among MMA fans and is regarded as a career high point for Rio Conan. Moving on to number 7, Ronda Rousey and Miesha Tate. While BJJ fighters make up the bulk of this list, here's Ronda Rousey, who came from a background in judo and submitted a BJJ practitioner, Miesha Tate. After all, a judoka named Mitsuyo Maeda taught the Gracie family the fundamentals of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Rousey's 8th armbar submission victories had revived the judoka community successfully. So what was her best submission victory? That would be Miesha Tate's first bout against her in Strikeforce. In the first minute, Rousey had Tate concerned, but the champion slipped away. Unfortunately for Tate, her luck ran out on her second attempt at an armbar later in the round. Miesha's arm had been twisted beyond recognition, and she finally had to give in and tap out to her sworn enemy. All of this was just the beginning of Rousey's legacy. Coming up at number 6, Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira versus Mirko Cro Cop. To make a name for himself, Antonio Minotauro Nogueira relied on 2 skills: taking shots that would knock a horse down and swiftly submitting his opponents right after. At Pride Final Conflict in 2003, Nogueira was scheduled to fight Mirko Filipovic, a Croatian special forces agent and one of the best knockout artists in mixed martial arts history. Unfortunately for the Brazilian, he was knocked down by a left cemetery kick from the Croatian in the final seconds of the first round. After a peaceful first round, Nogueira calmly drew Cro Cop into his territory, where he immediately mounted the hapless kickboxer and armbarred him after Cro Cop made the rookie error of straightening his arm out. This battle was an exciting submission and wonderfully encapsulated the skill and heart of one of the best heavyweights of all time. Next at number 5, Matt Hughes vs. Frank Trigg at UFC 52. The transition from sport to film's complete. Matt Hughes and Frank Trigg were set to rematch after Trigg submitted Hughes in the first round of their UFC 45 bout with a rear naked choke. Before the bout, Trigg engaged in extensive trash talking and made it clear he would do whatever was necessary to win. Seriously, since referee Mario Yamasaki missed Trigg's illegal knee to Hughes' crotch, he kept going after Hughes. Trigg tried to choke Hughes out and beat him up, but he was unable to win. Hughes dropped to his knees, hoisting Trigg above his head, and sprinted the full length of the octagon to land a devastating spine buster. Later, Hughes continued to lay it on thick until Trigg flipped over, at which point Hughes choked him out for the second time to secure his championship. Regardless of what you think, we think it's quite cool that he took a knee to the groin and then choked out his opponent. Moving on to number 4, Kazushi Sakuraba versus Renzo Gracie. In the early days of MMA, it was considered professional suicide to challenge Gracie with grappling. They were the ones that conceptualized the concept of a smaller man using BJJ to defeat a larger man in the UFC. One Japanese fighter, though, made light of the Gracie's fame. He goes under the name of Kazushi Sakuraba. As Sakuraba is known, the Gracie killer became so infamous for his string of victories over the Gracie family. At Pride 8, he defeated Royler Gracie through referee stoppage when the official thought Gracie's arm would break from a Sakuraba Kimura. This started him on his quest to defeat every Gracie. After 4 bouts, Sakuraba faced Renzo Gracie, the ADCC world champion and a top fighter in the Gracie family. An exciting matchup between 2 top grapplers. Sakuraba turned Gracie's body lock into a standing Kimura, and the Japanese legend cranked on the submission until Gracie's arm snapped. After 19 minutes of grueling hitting, clinching, and grappling, Sakubara considers the submission of Renzo to be the most prized of all his Gracie prey. Coming up at number 3, Nick Diaz and Takanori Gomi at Pride 33. Quite a hefty submission win for Nick Diaz. In 2006, Takanori Gomi was widely hailed as one of the sport's best lightweights. He became featured for his ability to starch numerous opponents with just his fists and awkward motions in the Pride promotion. At Pride 33, Gomi was slated to battle the Stockton Bad Boy in his first televised fight in the United States. Diaz called Gomi's right hook to the head a Hodoken, as it put Diaz down. Diaz was knocked unconscious, but fortunately he recovered. From that point on, the battle devolved into a full-on brawl, with both men trading blows at close range until the bell rang to end the first round. Diaz doesn't get tired as Gomi does, but he also doesn't have the energy level of the average person. In the second round, Gomi tripped and took down Diaz, giving Diaz the perfect opportunity to wrap up the Gogoplata, the MMA equivalent of the unicorn. Even though it's ruled as a no contest as Diaz tested positive for marijuana after the bout, this victory still ranks highly in his record books. Even under the influence of drugs, the athlete submitted one of the greatest lightweights with a Gogoplata. What a gangster. Next at number 2, Demetrius Johnson versus Ray Borg. Johnson's last victory in the UFC was by a flying armbar in October 2017. Before joining ONE Championship in 2019, this American's one of the best MMA fighters of all time, with a resume full of thrilling victories inside the ring, but his submission of Ray Borg at UFC 216 was arguably his greatest ever. After dominating Borg for most of the contest, a decision seemed inevitable. Johnson, though, pulled Borg off the ground with a suplex and then switched to an armbar before he landed on the mat. This has to be one of, if not the most impressive submission we've ever seen. Finally, at number 1, Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen at UFC 117. Anderson Silva's fans' worst nightmares came true when this battle took place. A loudmouth, lay-and-pray wrestler who insulted them publicly brought down their idol with a single punch. What were the odds that the man who spat in Silva's face and called him a fake BJJ black belt would be able to out-grapple the middleweight champion? In particular, how was Chael Sonnen planning to back up his trash talk? Sonnen dominated the best of all time for more than 4 rounds, making the fight a beating for Silva fans. Silva threw up his legs in the 5th round for a desperate triangle choke and successfully defended his title. After the dust settled, Silva's first victory over his greatest opponent came courtesy of the Nogueira brothers' black belt, which Sonnen had previously insulted. Because of this submission, sports fans everywhere were reminded that the best fighters in the world are never out of a fight. And that's a wrap for this video. Do you consider Anderson Silva as the greatest of all time? Let us know in the comments below. If you liked the video, hit like, share, and subscribe to our channel. See you at the next one.